Daddy, tell me about how you came to know John Lennon.
Well, this is one of these very unlikely stories, but of course they're the best kind. Um, if I wanted to be absolutely ludicrously exploitative about this, I would say I was in bed with John Lennon. Technically true, but there's a lot more to the story. There were about 18 of us in bed. It was a party at Rick Sklar's apartment. Now, Rick Sklar was always second in command of WINS, rock and roll station. And that was it was 50,000 watt rock and roll wall to wall. Uh, but they hired me because they were really in trouble with the FCC. There was a payola scandal and a very unfortunate series of revelations. But it turns out that songs that made the top 40 were ones where the publishers forked over. They bribed the disc jockeys and the appropriate radio stations with cash, drugs, and sex, not necessarily in that order. And when the FCC said, hey, this has gone on long enough, stations make promises of what they're going to do in order to get a license. With a license, your typical radio station can be worth millions and millions of dollars. Without a license, there are about $5,000 worth of used tape recorders and equipment, office equipment, and you don't want to lose your license. But so WINS was riding high, and they, in order to change their ways, when the payola scandal broke, they reached out for anybody who could complete an English sentence without egregious error, and they made him into a talk host, and I was right there at the right time. And WINS was, of course, the home of Murray the K, Murray Kaufman, who foisted himself upon the Beatles, had himself reinvented as the fifth Beatle, but I had no idea that John Lennon knew me. But I knew Rick Sklar. As I said, he was always second in command under Mel Leeds of the great WINS back in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And then Rick Sklar became number one, and it made him the most powerful man. He couldn't sing a note, bless his heart, but he was one of the most powerful men in American music simply because he had such powerful wattage on the air, and he could make or break any song nearby. So he invited me to a party. We became good friends. Not at first. At first, even though they stood to lose their license, there was still pushback among the rock and roll clique that ran and owned WINS. They still weren't quite ready to give even 1 hour a day, which is what I had, over to a talk host who interviewed people, including politicians. But that's what WINS was, 23 hours a day, rock and roll, and 1 hour of Wynn's Open Mic with Barry Farber. So Rick invited me to his party, and then there was one room there where there was a bed, and there were about 18 of us sitting on the bed. And great party. I introduced myself to my bedmates, and I really couldn't see too well. It was so crowded and jammed and so many people coming and going. I said, I'm Barry Farber. He said, I'm John Lennon. And of course, even though I was not part of the rock and roll world, the name John Lennon was enough to throw you off your horse. I don't care how skilled a rider you were. Turns out, what a happy surprise. There's no word for this in the English language. There's no word for being suddenly surprised that someone who's a major figure thinks you are also a major figure. Well, he was a regular listener and politically very sophisticated. I've always wondered, I talked to Sid Bernstein, who was the real fifth Beatle. He brought the Beatles over, put them on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was their triumphal American debut. I was trying to figure out if John Lennon were real, how did he get the reputation of being so liberal? Was it a deliberate pose? Was it merely an exaggeration of his true political feelings? He did not strike me as politically liberal at all. We talked about the issues of the day. He was against the dictatorships, mostly communist at that time, some fascists. He was obviously on the side of racial justice, but gee, who wasn't? So I couldn't help but wonder, is John Lennon, did he inherit the mantle of liberal? Was it written in some constitution somewhere that if you're a superstar in music and you're a great entertainer, then you're automatically branded as a liberal? I don't know. But John Lennon to me was a thoroughly rational, intelligent, tolerant of other opinions. And I really enjoyed our talk with him. Can you imagine me sitting there on a bed with about 18 other people in Rick Sklar's apartment, and here John Lennon is commenting on who I had on the air last night, who I had on the night before last, and that real wacko from Yugoslavia Wednesday before last, wasn't he something? To have this kind of conversation with John Lennon was a towering reward. I like to think, you don't always get what you like to think, but I like to think that if John Lennon had lived, instead of being shot dead by this worthless excuse of a person, if John Lennon had lived, I think he would have gone down all the way over. I think he would have led a reformation of the entertainment world from the far left, if not to right of center, at least to the middle. He was what they call down south a good old boy. And to me, he was the architect of some major happy moments when I realized how thrilling it was to me and to other people that John Lennon was a listener to the Barry Farber show. I could live for about 8 months on a fact of life on a compliment like that.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Congratulations.